Hello again. We're going to talk a little bit more about end user needs. Now you're probably saying to yourself, wow, another discussion of end user needs? We're always talking about end user needs. What else can we say? Well, in a sense, you're right. We'll just keep on delving deeper and deeper or looking at different aspects of it. But the reason we keep on coming back to end user needs is they are so central for commercializing a technology. If you cannot meet a need, nobody's going to buy it. So you have to understand the end user needs. And the problem is we're trying to understand something that is subjective because the need is held by somebody and they may not express it if they choose not to, may not articulate it. We're trying to understand something so subjective that it's difficult sometimes, so we have to figure out ways that we can infer it so we can begin to understand what's going on, so we can ask questions and get somebody to articulate what's really going on. What do I mean? Well, let's take a look at the telephone. When I was a kid growing up, the telephone was something that plugged into the wall. There was a wire that came into the wall. In that context, the battery for the telephone really wasn't an issue. There was no battery in a telephone. In fact, the telephone had its own power coming down the line, so if the power went out in the house, the telephone still worked. Now the telephone is pretty much a cell phone. In fact, in my children's generation, most of them don't even have landlines. Now the battery becomes central in the telephone. And in fact, it's not even a telephone anymore. It is a device that does a variety of things. They do email on it, text messaging, surf the web. It's a convergence device. It's almost a universal communicator. It's like in Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty, or I'm looking for some information here on my wristwatch. I'm Dick Tracy or whatever. So the battery becomes much, much more important. Obviously, if I think about the context in which the device is going to be used, it sets constraints on what the end users will need. So I can rule out some things. Where everybody's using landlines, I can rule out concerns about very long life batteries. On the other hand, where everybody is using a cell phone as an adjunct, I need a battery, but I don't necessarily need a very long life battery. And if everybody's just using cell phones, not only do I need to think about a very long life battery, but I'm not even thinking battery anymore. I'm thinking power source. How do I power this thing? Keep it always powered up. It may not be a battery anymore. It may be a capacitor tied to a little solar device or a little fuel cell that I plug it into. I have to think about the power system. So you can see the context in which the end user is operating, the practices that they are engaged in, or the cross practices where the technology is being applied, will go far to helping you understand what their needs are likely to be. Now, one other thing I want to say about end user needs before we go into talking about performance, ease of use, and price yet one more time. The needs will vary by customer segment. So you have to be very, very specific about which customer segment you're looking at. And you have to define the customer segments in terms of the types of needs and behaviors that the end users exhibit. For somebody in my generation, the need on the cell phone is probably different than for somebody in my children's generation. Or our needs are closer together, my children and mine, than our grandparents, their grandparents, my parents, who use it really just as an adjunct device. So we have different customer segments, and I cannot assume that the constraints that exist for one customer segment will exist for another customer segment unless I go out and do some research. A very common problem that we see in market research that's done is that people will go out and they will get some big general market research report that will say the market for cell phone batteries is X, Y, and Z, and it's this big, and they need this, that, and the other thing. But what they forget is that that market, that big market, is made up of discrete customer segments, And you can only really understand the big market by understanding the discrete segments and then aggregating it up. You can't take a large general market report and then draw conclusions about different customer segments from it because it's all mushed in the aggregation. Okay, let's go now and look one more time at performance, ease of use, and price.